then, they'll catch up, but also, you can distribute it.
Okay.
So thank you for having us today. As you know, this is the second part in a 3-part series that we've put together for NCCU to give students the exposure on life in a public relations agency, and in particular PAN. Today, the focus is going to be on understanding how client service works within a PR firm, and of course, how important culture and people are to an agency. So our 2 invited guests are Darlene Doyle, the head of client relations at PAN, and Elizabeth Famiglietti, the head of HR and all things people-oriented at PAN. I'll begin by turning it over to them so that they can give a little background on themselves, just quickly how they got to where they are, any highlights that they have in particular, Darlene working with clients or Elizabeth working with our people. So with that, let's go to you first, Darlene.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. For the folks that will be listening to the recording as well, hello and thank you. So I am head of client relations at PAN. I started at the agency about 6 years ago. First stepping into the role as a vice president, managing client programs. So I had a portfolio of clients whom I worked with on their integrated marketing and PR programs. I was also responsible for acquiring clients into the agency, and then also managing a dedicated team. So those were the kind of my 3 core roles. And I think about 2 years ago it was Phil identified the desire to have someone that was part of the executive team that could bring more insights from our overall client base. So, what are the trends that we see within our clients? What are the challenges that we're seeing? How should we be thinking about services? And how does that inform kind of our strategic vision as an agency? So I joined that team about 2 years ago. It's been a crazy fun ride. Certainly always new and exciting. So that's been really great. I did spend time at the start of my career at an agency as well. I spent about 7 years. I think for anyone that's kind of debating things, the agency is the best training ground in communications, bar none. I'm biased because it was my experience, but I think it's an awesome way to learn the ropes. I spent about 7 years there, and then I went in-house for about 7 years. And when I look back at my in-house experience, I think that it allowed me to kind of put myself in our clients' shoes. So when I came back around and boomeranged back as a vice president, I felt like I really understood the components of a marketing and communications team. And I was able to kind of bring that client empathy and insight into the programs. So yeah, that's me.
That's good. Great. Thank you. So Elizabeth.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Famiglietti. I head up human resources at PAN Communications. I joined PAN back in 2011. And prior to that, I had worked in healthcare, manufacturing, big companies, small companies, and my last 2 opportunities were both in professional services organizations, which I absolutely love because your people are your product. So I found my way to PAN, and this is a big part of what I would advise students to do is to tap into any kind of network that you can. Phil's roommate in college was the previous CEO of the company that I worked for before PAN. So when Phil was looking for a head of human resources, he had reached out to his friend, and his friend put me got in touch with Phil. So that's how I landed at PAN. We were about 45 people strong in Boston when I joined. And as you guys probably know now, we're about 140 employees strong with 5 different locations, including an office in the UK now. So the company has been on a pretty good growth trajectory, which makes everyone's jobs more exciting. So I spend my day really aligning all of our people programs and strategies to the business strategies. And that's the most exciting part of my job. So in HR, I get involved in talent acquisition, talent development. I manage all of the total rewards programs at PAN. So that's the benefits programs, the compensation programs, the reward and recognition programs. Obviously, there's compliance, And a big part of my job is managing the navigating, I guess, and managing the culture at PAN, which is basically how an organization behaves. What the employees believe in, how they exhibit these behaviors, what are our core values, and that's really kind of what comes together from a culture perspective. And I manage all the teams that help to continue to foster our positive culture. I'm excited to spend some time with you guys today and help you kind of navigate through your last year at the university and being able to hopefully get into a good career trajectory. You have a lot to offer, and I'm hopeful that after this session, you guys will walk away with some helpful tips on resumes and interviewing and networking. I know it's an exciting time. I know it can be a pretty scary time as well, but we're here to support you every step of the way. So thank you for having me.
Great. So like last night's moderator at the vice presidential debate, I've divided our 40 minutes into 4 segments.
Oh, that's not fair.
One of you. So the first area is looking for your first job. And the first question will go to you, Elizabeth, and that is, what are the pay ranges in this industry and at PAN for entry-level roles? And do you have any tips on negotiating salaries?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, so entry level, and again, location is going to make a difference too, guys. So if, just make sure that you're cognizant of that, because cost of living in different states is going to be different, right? So I have pay ranges for our entry level job is called an account coordinator, and it is literally post grad. We like to be able to see students that have done some internships. If you haven't been able to do internships, don't fret. You definitely have some transferable skills, I'm sure, in what you've been doing in summers and helping family and friends out, etc. But the range for account coordinators in the Boston area between 40-43 is really kind of where our account coordinators come into play. At the account coordinator level, you usually, if things are going well, you're usually in that position for about 6 months is really kind of the ideal. Some people can move up faster. Some people need a little bit longer time in the role, which is completely fine. Once you move up into that next level at the agency, it's called an assistant account executive. And those folks are probably between 45 and 48 in terms of base salaries. Now, Boston is kind of our midpoint in terms of cost of living. When you move to New York, you get higher rates because it's a higher cost of living. When you move to San Francisco, it's even a higher cost of living. And then we have Orlando, which is a little bit lower cost of living, obviously, than Boston. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about, negotiating salary or asking about the salary ranges. It's absolutely going to be commensurate with the state that you're in. So keep that in mind from a comp perspective.
Great. And of course, we can come back to compensation for any specific questions that students or Tiandu might have at the conclusion. Both of you review resumes, obviously you, Elizabeth, in order to turn them over to the hiring manager, and you, yep, Darlene, because most of these hiring managers report to you. So my question is, what can students do to make their resume and their email stand out, either for you or the hiring manager?
For a resume, I know this is going to sound so basic, right? But you want to make sure that there's no typos and there's no misspelling in your resume. That's the first thing that gets screened out, because obviously you want to, in everything, in terms of you're preparing your resume, you're preparing for an interview, you're preparing for a call. The preparedness is so important, right? And so that means you have a clean resume, that you've had your professors take a look at it. You've had other people in the industry. If you have alumni that, that you're close with, have them take a look at it. If you know somebody in HR, like me now, you know me, I'm happy to take a look at your resume as well. But basics is just make sure that there's no typos or misspellings in your resume. You want to make sure that the resume is in a PDF format, because what happens when it's in Word and it goes through certain applicant tracking systems, it gets all jumbled and it makes it really difficult for a recruiter. It's like a nightmare. So when you're ready to submit into a company's website, you want to make sure that your resume is in a PDF format and it's not in a Word doc. Back in the day, we used to do cover letters, and I still get cover letters from students and from applicants. But I think that what's replaced that, honestly, is just a thoughtful email. And the email you should kind of look at as your kind of elevator pitch. You don't want to recite your resume in your email. You just want to give us a little bit of insight into who you are and why we should be reading your resume. And it should be kind of short and sweet, and it should have a little bit of your personality in it as best as you can in writing. So I would recommend that you do that. And then the last thing I would encourage you to do is to use LinkedIn. Make sure that you're putting your profile up there. Make sure that you're connecting with people. People will connect with you. You should have a LinkedIn profile. You should connect with all of your professors. You should connect with people in your life. You should connect with your parents, your sister, your brothers, anyone that's on LinkedIn. Build your network. I often get a message from someone that I'm connected with, and it can be 3 people removed, and I'll get an email saying, my son, my daughter, my niece is graduating from, XYZ college and is looking for a certain opportunity. And if I don't have an opportunity at PAN, I'll still take the time to push that email to some of my other HR colleagues that I know in different industries to say, could you help this person out? So LinkedIn is a great place to be, and make sure that you're taking advantage of that.
Thank you. Yeah. Darlene, same question. Anything, because your perspective would be a little bit different on that.
Yeah, sure. One quick note on the LinkedIn piece too is like that personal note. I always like when someone actually provides context as to why they're reaching out. And that is usually what has me accept that invitation is, they'll say, oh, I was looking at your profile and I'm interested in understanding, your experience in tech PR, or something that makes it like you've done some homework as to why you want to connect with that person. Elizabeth, you also mentioned something really good on one of our other calls, which was thinking about the alumni network as well. That's always a team that's eager to help you as you kind of grow and develop as a professional. So think about that alumni network as well. Phil, I think the one thing that Elizabeth didn't touch on that I would add, I always look at people's personal interests, because that shows areas of passion, it shows areas of work ethic, it shows areas of just you as a person. And I think that's really important in your first job. So it might be a club you're affiliated with, volunteer work that you've done, languages that you've learned, just things that kind of give us a dimension of your person and your experience. We don't expect that you're going to have 10 internships listed on that resume. We're delighted to see 1 to 2, but even when that doesn't exist, there are things that you bring to the table, and we want to understand that. I was just on a call at the end of yesterday with a candidate, and the best part of our conversation was the last 10 minutes when we were talking about personal interests, and I felt like I really got to know that candidate through that discussion. And your resume can kind of tip me off to what can I ask about that person's personal interests, hobbies, and all of that stuff. So that's important as well.
Great. I'm curious to know, what are 3 things that you might look for in an entry-level employee? Elizabeth, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yep. I think first and foremost is you want to be prepared, right? So it's super impressive when you get on a phone with a candidate and you know that they've done their homework. So you know that, how many offices we have, that, some of the client work that we have, which is all on the website. So you definitely, whatever company you're applying to, you want to research that company as best that you can. Read the press releases about the company, which will tell you a little bit about the news and what's new in that company, what's happening, if they just did an acquisition, if they just opened up a different office, if they just closed a different office. So I absolutely really are impressed when people, have done their homework and they can come to the table and have a conversation with me about PAN and knowing some things about PAN before they, even start to talk with me. So I would say research the company. Enthusiasm, being enthusiastic and wanting to learn. and bringing that energy to the interview process. And it can be draining. Absolutely, the whole process of interviewing and get nervous and that whole thing. But I like when someone is eager, because then that means that they're moldable and they want to learn and they're passionate, and we can pretty much teach anything. But that kind of comes from the core. So it's preparedness, research your company, lead with some enthusiasm and energy. Ask a good set of questions. I just had a candidate kind of come through, and the final interview was with an SVP of our healthcare practice. And, his feedback to me was she was okay. I think that the skills are okay. But the thing that struck me is she didn't have any questions for me. And that just signals that you're not, you haven't done your homework. I mean, you have to come up with at least a couple of questions. I don't care if in the interview process you've met with 4 different people. When you're meeting with someone, you've got to come up with even if it's tell me a little bit about your career, even if it's something like that, but asking a question and making sure that you're prepared to ask 1 or 2 questions to each person that you're meeting with, again, shows that you're interested, shows that you've done your homework. And that you're curious, right? And you want to learn. So those are my 3 things: preparedness, research the company, and ask some good questions.
Darlene, do you have 3 that you would look for in an entry-level employee?
Yeah, I'll echo Elizabeth's sentiment on the curiosity piece. The questions show your eagerness to learn. So that's really important, not just in the interview process, but once you actually start somewhere, you're supposed to be in that process of learning and taking all things in. And by asking questions, you can learn a lot about the business. So curiosity is definitely a key one. Collaborative, we're in a teamwork environment. So certainly at an agency, your ability to collaborate, your ability to show that you want to be part of a team, that you want to learn from, people that have had your experience and from people that have had different experiences. I think that's really important in an agency. And then we always talk a lot, particularly once you start at an agency, proactivity. And that's just showing that, you're looking for opportunities, you're looking for where you can help, you're looking for where you can add value to the business. And when we see someone that wants to be proactive, I think it just helps feed like you getting the opportunities that you're looking for, because then we feel like someone's really in it. So I think those are my 3 things. And actually, if I had a 4th, Elizabeth, I'd say enthusiasm for sure. Yeah. It's almost like the umbrella pieces. Knowing someone wants to be in it. So
I think that students attending and listening to this can take all of your advice and reflect on preparedness, enthusiasm, and curiosity, and being more proactive and engaged. But talk a little bit about this collaborative one. How would an entry-level student looking for their first job show and convince a hiring manager that they, in fact, possess and are passionate about being in a collaborative team environment?
I'm happy to start if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I know I mentioned about talking about some of your personal experiences in your resume, but I think one of the ways I understand collaboration is what you do outside of school. It might be you're part of a sports team, or again, it might be that volunteer piece, or it might be your job. You're working at, the local library or whatever that might be. But those are ways I think you can talk about how you've worked in a team environment to, reach a broader goal. It's not just about yourself, but what your role is within that kind of ecosystem. Likewise, you could talk about some of your collaborative work that you've done in school. It might be a project that you developed. It might be, some kind of research that you did with a team of people, but understanding and explaining what your role was within that and how it helped achieve a broader goal, I think is really important. So there are a lot of things from your own personal experience that you can bring and talk about how you could, use that in an agency environment and in a teamwork environment.
Good. Anything, Elizabeth, that you might want to hit on to help advise how to show more collaboration?
Yeah, no, I same as what Darlene is saying. I don't think I would have anything addition to add to that.
Okay. So my last question before I move to the next area of concentration is for both of you, and that is, what are some of the skill sets unique to today's environment that stand out to you when looking at an applicant? Things like social media, digital interest, video, marketing, talk a little bit about that, because as you know, what Tiando has here are a group of mass communications majors that have other areas of expertise. So I think that might be helpful for them to hear.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there's general skills that you can apply to, any opportunity, right? So being organized and showing your organizational skills, being resourceful and showing how you don't have to have all the answers, but you've got to be resourceful and know where to go and get the answers, right? And so I just think there's just some general things, interpersonal skills, right? Being on teams at school and projects, leadership skills, right? I don't care if you work at the local, supermarket, you can still show leadership skills. If you're doing some community service, you can still show some leadership skills. If it's a sport or something that you do kind of on the weekends with, say, younger children or something, you can show your leadership skills. So for me, there's the core set of skills that if you've had some internships that you can point to that are specific to communications and PR and the education that you've had. But then there's this broader set of skills that everyone can bring to the table, and you just need to learn how to pull it from the various places that you've been able to glean it. It doesn't necessarily have to be just at the college. It can be part of your life experience too. And then you learn how to kind of transfer those skills into a business environment and be able to articulate why that's going to make you a good candidate for this particular, position.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Darlene.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Phil. I was just going to add, it's funny because, so many people coming in and out of school, you are such digital natives that's almost more of an understood than maybe some of the softer skills. So I totally agree, Elizabeth, on the resourcefulness. That's always like really impressive to me when someone kind of comes and says, I did this research and I did this homework before coming with the question. The other piece I would say too is connectedness. I know when this is going to make me sound very old, but when I was in college, I was a journalism major, and my teacher would say, you need to read a paper every single day. So I would take my 50 cents and buy the Boston Globe at the local, coffee shop. And I read the paper every day. And I got into that habit. Of course, now it's evolved and it's all online, but I got into that habit, and that was the connectedness to understand what are the broader issues that are happening, and how can I be thinking about those things. I think that's the kind of stuff that creates like thought-provoking ideas. That's the kind of
curious.
That gets your brain going. So connectedness and staying up with the news, I feel like, is really critical as well, particularly in agency life, but just in general.
I don't hear that very often, and I think it's really a great idea and a good comment for anyone in any industry to stay connected with current events. It's an icebreaker. It's a way that you, in our field, can leverage clients' news and fit it more appropriately into what's going on in the world at large. So that's great. Well, thank you, senators. We're going to move to the next area of our debate here this evening. So, Darlene, question for you, and this is all about agency life and a little bit deeper dive there. But from your perspective, what's the major difference between agency PR, in-house PR, and nonprofit PR? And what skill sets do you think rise to the top in some of those?
Yeah. Well, I'll actually start with what I think is the common denominator, which is just being a really good communicator. I think whether you're in-house or your agency, that's a core skill that serves you on either side of those things. Having had the experience on both sides, I think agency, you really become a specialist. And I mean a specialist in terms of you really become an expert communicator when it comes to how you think about social media, how you think about communicating with a client, how you think about developing strategy for a client, media relations, like these kind of core things. I think you develop a proficiency that is very, very strong in an agency. I think in-house, my personal experience was it's a little bit more diversified. So less of a specialist and more of a generalist insofar as you have to have a hand into understanding the different functions within marketing, lead generation, understanding how the marketing team partners with design teams and what is their role within that, understanding kind of the brand and how you bring a brand to market. So I would say it's specialists versus generalists. In my personal experience, I felt like the thing that I was the most spoiled about on the agency side was getting to work with people who did what I did and understood what I did. I'll never forget my last job at a in my in-house role, and one of the engineers coming over and saying, wow, it's so awesome that the New York Times just picked up that story. And it was like, oh my gosh, I wanted to put my head through a wall. Like they didn't pick up the story. We worked very hard. We worked for 2 years to establish a relationship with this reporter.
Yeah.
And then we had this great piece of news. That reporter picked up my phone call and took the news. But there can be kind of a lack of understanding of the role of communications. Sometimes in-house, depending on who you work with, but I think it's getting to work with specialists who do what you do.
Good. Elizabeth, I was curious, as a follow-on to that, what do you think makes agency PR so appealing?
I think that, and I've worked with, PAN is actually the first agency that I've worked in, and prior to that, it's all kind of corporate type organizations. And I would say the culture part of it for me. I mean, now there's definitely some big companies out there, that have great cultures. And like, don't get me wrong, but I think that in an agency, it's entrepreneurial, it's fast paced, it's super collaborative, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of, when I first went there, I was like, wow, this seems like an extension of college in some respects, right? Because everyone is just so like, energized and collaborative, and they like to socialize too. And it just, to me, it just felt like, wow, this is just a really vibrant culture. And I feel that way with agency. And that's why this has been such an exciting role for me, because the people part of it is really where it gets me up in the morning. And in a culture, in an agency, it's that way. You're learning faster. I think the pace is faster. In an agency, you're learning about different industries, because you're going to have different clients. Whereas if you're going in-house, you're learning about one company, one brand. And I don't think it's as fast moving as I feel agencies are. So I think it's just I think it's just a more enriching experience. I think you're
right, Elizabeth. And I think what Darlene was keying in on, in an agency, everyone is doing the same thing, versus in a nonprofit environment or in a corporate environment, you most likely are the only communications person. You are, so you're alone in that regard. So interesting dialogue. Thank you. A question for both of you, and that is, how would you advise an individual that's interested in specializing or developing that track that's of interest to them at an agency? And I guess maybe at what point in their career would you tell them they would be a good time to talk to their hiring manager about that? So Darlene, do you want to give it a first shot?
Sure. So we do have specialty tracks, at PAN, in media relations, content, integrated marketing. But my advice and counsel is always to spend the first few years of your career and the first few years in the agency building a really strong foundation. And if you have a strong foundation, then you can really just determine what are your personal areas of interest. So I would say, Phil, about 3 to 4 years into the role is when you would start to define. You might say, as a senior account executive, for example, at PAN, you have a year under your belt, you would say, you know what, I feel like I just get really jazzed about writing. And I just feel like, I get a lot of praise from my VP on my writing. I get a lot of client accolades. And that's just an area I'm really excited about. And I think that's the time where you can really start to become a specialist. But first, you have to be a generalist and have that baseline understanding. And that will serve you well, both at your agency, but also when you leave and go on to do something else, is just having that really strong foundation. So I would say a few years in, Phil, but certainly, we always encourage folks at PAN, even in your first job out of school, we'll say, if there's a particular industry you want to work in, for example, some people might come and they'll tell Elizabeth in the interview process, I really want to have an opportunity to work on a healthcare program. Those are things we try to do all along the path. So we try to make those kind of accommodations or give you those experiences, or you might say, I really want to work on a team that does paid and organic social because I haven't had that experience yet. And we try to make that happen along the way. But when it gets to the specialist thing, a few years in.
Good. Elizabeth, anything that you want to add to that?
No, I agree with Darlene. I think that you want to be a really strong athlete so you can be used in various parts of an organization, before you specialize. But if you find that there's aspects of the job that are sexier to you than others, you can do that stuff on your own time too. You can get a mentor outside of your organization to help develop those skills. You can take a class or course in that, on your own time. So it's like, don't lose the passion for some of the things that specialized areas that you might have. You might love writing, or you might love the whole social media side of things. Like, don't lose that passion, cultivate that passion. Find the right people in your organizations that do those types of things, and go to lunch with them, or have coffee with them and kind of pick their brain a little bit. But in terms of the actual role, I would agree with Darlene. You want to be a solid generalist before you hit a specialty track.
Very good. So Elizabeth, let's stay on you for a minute. Can you explain a bit about how the onboarding process at most agencies work? And of course, you'll use PAN as an example, but I think it's beneficial for students to hear that.
Yeah, so we've always had a pretty robust onboarding process at PAN, which consists of when we identify, when you're onboarding, we identify your first 2 to 3 accounts that you're going to be on, and then Team HR works to build with your dedicated career coach a series of training sessions and orientation sessions. So like the first 3 weeks, we build in onto your calendar who you're going to meet with, what you're going to learn. And then we also at PAN have this woman, Sydney, who sits in our Orlando office. She is an account soup. And so she's kind of grown up through the ranks at PAN, knows about every level in the organization. And so she actually teaches people the PAN way. And so she stays close to our new hires as part of the onboarding for the first 3 months of joining, and longer if needed. But she teaches all of, when you enter an organization, even if you've worked at other companies, every organization kind of does things their own way, a little bit different. And so I call it the PAN way. And so, how does PAN do this? How does PAN do that? Where do I find this? Who do I speak to about this? She's just an awesome resource for it. And as a college student too, you're coming into a business environment for the first time sometimes. And it's like, okay, what do I need to know? How do I manage 1 million emails a day? How do I toggle between this priority and that priority? So she's really grounded in some of the basics of helping the students come from a college environment to a business environment, and what's most important to kind of hone in from a skill set perspective. Of course, obviously now with COVID, all of our employees are working 100% remote. So now we've had to build into our orientation sessions what we call kind of virtual meetups that you would typically do when you're in an office and you go and have coffee with somebody. We always set somebody up for a lunch on their first day, or coffee with this one, and just as a meet and greet. So we've tried to push that more virtual so that they have time within their day over the first 3 months to just meet people in the organization and not talk about work, but just kind of meet and kind of make that connection, because culture is so important to us at PAN. So it's a pretty comprehensive, process. And I personally meet with everybody within the first 2 weeks of their coming on board. And then my HR business partners who have responsibility for the various groups in the organization, they touch base with new hires, throughout their first journey of their first year as well.
So let's stay on that and talk a little bit more about PAN. And this question, Darlene, goes to you. Give a glimpse into what daily life looks like at PAN for an individual at an account executive or AAE or account coordinator level, areas that these students would be most interested in hearing about.
Sure. So I think what you could probably expect on a daily basis is, I know we talked a few minutes ago about, reading the news, but that's, kind of one of the first things that you're doing in the morning is scanning news headlines. You'll scan the major business news headlines, and then probably what we call some industry trade publications. So for example, if you have a client that's in retail, you might read some of the retail trade headlines and see what's going on, because that helps you understand what's happening within the news cycle. And how might that be relevant to your clients? Likewise on social media, scanning those social media channels, scanning your Twitter feed, scanning, Facebook, Instagram, as it relates to some of the client programs to just get a baseline for what's going on that day. You might join a client call for a half hour to an hour where you sit and you talk about the week's activities and what are the priorities and what are the things that are in queue for that week.
And what would their role be, Darlene, on those client calls?
I would say at the AE level, everybody has a role on our calls. So everybody speaks on our client calls. Sometimes you might have a bigger role. On a particular week, you may be talking more. Some weeks it may be, just a few things, but we develop an agenda every week for those client calls. And everybody has an assignment on that agenda. And we actually like everybody on the team to have a voice, because our best experience with clients is when they know and trust the team from the top on down. We don't want them just to be attached to the vice president or just to be attached to the supervisor. We want them to feel the entire strength of the team. So having your voice heard on weekly calls, in quarterly client meetings, that's really important. So you might be giving an update on pitches. You might be giving an update on something you read in the news and wanted to get their gut. You might be checking in on the social media calendar that you developed to make sure all of the content was approved and see if they have any questions. From there, you probably have an internal team touch base. So that would be 20, 30 minutes that you guys would jump on a virtual Zoom, and you might be brainstorming new media angles for that week, or you might be talking about some kind of creative campaign that you want to put into the quarterly plan. So that's where a lot of that team collaboration comes into place. Probably spend some time doing some media pitching. You might spend some time doing some writing. Your day will be packed. It will go by quickly, without question.
And it'll never be the same, right, Darlene?
It'll never be the same in your to-do list that you start with that never ends. Honestly, some days you come in and you'll think, I'm going to be doing this. And, one of the cool things about being in client relations and also in, communications and PR, the news landscape frames your day, your clients frame your day. So it's never boring. I can say that without question. It's never dull. It's never boring. It's always changing. So.
Mm-hmm. So we have probably another 15 minutes or so, and let's move into what's going on in our industry. But clearly we are in the middle of two historical pandemics right now, a racism pandemic and COVID-19. We have a stock market that's been extremely volatile. We have an election coming up. How is PAN maintaining and keeping from high turnover or creating an inclusive environment and addressing some of the health and safety issues that people are very concerned and worried about? So it's a broad question, but I'd love to hear from both of you on it. And let's go to you first, Elizabeth.
Sure. I think it was a little bit of a crazy time, right? Because it came on pretty quickly. One minute we were in the office in February, and the next minute we were sending everybody to their homes and apartments and flats, within a week. And so I think the first thing, there was no playbook for this, right? Like, we've never really had a pandemic that we've been having to kind of manage through. I think that the foundation that we've set at PAN, and it being a very open, honest, and collaborative organization, really kind of helped us do what we do naturally and kind of pull it into place. And so what we did immediately is to increase communication. So, because, it can be pretty isolating, right? When you're in an office environment and you've got your colleagues around you on a day-to-day basis, and then everybody gets pushed to their homes, immediately feel a loss. So we tried to just communicate more regularly. So Phil was meeting with the executive team on a more regular basis. We were meeting with our departments on a more regular basis. As an agency, we usually meet once a quarter. We were meeting on a monthly basis. In addition to that, Phil was putting out literally daily emails to staff. So we have a really good support system. Even pre-COVID, we have the leaders of the client relations organization. They have teams of people that they watch out for. We have a dedicated career coach model that has certain people that they kind of watch out for and help to develop their careers. We have a full-fledged HR department that touches base and has a good relationship with all the employees in the organization. So we have a really good support system. And so we just kind of turned that support system on, kind of on steroids though, because we were not only just checking in on how they were doing, from a work perspective and managing from home, and do you have the right setup? But we really kind of turned our career coaches into kind of life coaches, because it's like, how are you doing mentally? Like, how is your mental health? Like, how's your family? Is everybody safe? Like, all of our emails for the first like 4 months was like, be well, stay safe, be well, stay safe. And then, it was just so different in that we really kind of just had to encompass taking care of our people first, and then in addition to the work. And I think that's kind of how Pan approached it. We're still doing a lot of that. We're not out of the woods of this situation. And we're still doing a lot of that check-in. We're actually launching a mental health series of webinars next week, where we partnered with an organization, Minding Your Mind. And it's psychologists and psychiatrists that are going to be talking to staff. And it's specifically about what are we all going through mentally as we try to make it through this health pandemic, on top of a racism pandemic, on top of the election. And then, of course, we have a place in California, so we're watching the air quality and fires in California. So there's a lot to kind of take in, and we just keep telling staff, we're in this together. It is temporary. We will get to the other side of this for sure. But we need to be kind to one another, and we need to support one another. And I think that's how Pan has made it through, and continues to kind of, support everyone during these really challenging times.
Well, one thing that I didn't hear, Elizabeth, before we go to Darlene, that you have talked often to our employees about, is to remind them that this is a moment in time, and that this too shall pass. And this is not what any of you planned for your senior years, or how to embark upon your first job. Today is a perfect example where, in the ideal world, I would be on campus delivering this webinar, and it would be a guest lecture. So it's a different time, and it is a moment in time, isn't it, Elizabeth?
Yeah, and that's definitely how we've approached it, with employees. We've kind of wrapped our arms around them to just let them know that this is a moment in time, and that we will see the other side of this. And I think too, as students, sure, it's a different environment for you guys too. Are you guys in the classroom, or are you taking classes from home primarily?
It's a
Home
hybrid.
primarily.
Yeah.
What did you say, Matthew?
Home primarily.
Home primarily.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and that's tough, right? I have a daughter who's a junior in college, and she's studying remotely, and I can see it's definitely it's just not the same. It's definitely a challenge.
Oh yeah.
It's definitely a challenge. I see that. It's a moment in time, and we build resilience during this time too. And I think there's a lot of we've been watching. Who's that guy from The Office that did those?
Jim. What's his name?
Krasaki.
What's his name?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
You know who I'm talking about? The guy from The Office. He did those things about like what's good in the world, and there is so much good that came out of some of this bad, right? And so we try to continue to encourage that too. And so as students, keep focusing on the things that are good that are coming out of this. There's a lot of change. Look at what's happening in the world from a diversity perspective. There's a lot of really positive change that's coming out of that tragedy. And so it's, we got to look at the silver lining in some of this stuff that we're dealing with to kind of make it through. But I feel like,
Darlene,
as Pan,
anything?
Go ahead,
Elizabeth.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's in terms of Pan, I feel like the culture is what kind of helped us pull together during this challenging time.
Yeah.
Darlene, anything that we might have not touched on?
I would just add two things, just really underscoring two things, because I think about this from the client perspective as well, but also how you think about prospective employers. Is that right? Yeah. And prospective employers is the importance of leadership and the importance of communication during crises. And I think when I look at both internally at Pan, but also how we've partnered with clients, the importance of strong leadership to speak up and step up is so critical right now. And that's what employees are looking for from their leadership. They want to be with a company that is willing to step up and step out and speak up. And I think that's really important. And likewise, the power of communication. We have an exhausted client relations team. They worked, so much with clients, navigating crises this year, but we also have a really engaged group of employees, because the role of communications, when you see that you're helping support, what is the message that the CEO is taking out after the murder of George Floyd? What is the message that a CEO might say around a DEI journey? What is the message around, the death of an employee due to COVID? And the importance of communication in that is, our role is incredible, the power of that, and what it means. Like, you can come out on the other side stronger, or you can come outside worse, based on both leadership and communication. So, yeah.
Well, I do have a few more questions, but I think with only 7 minutes remaining, I'll see if any of the students have a specific question that is on their mind. And if not, I'm happy to jump in with a couple more. One thing on my mind, and this may be more appropriate for you, Elizabeth, but are agencies across the board making it a priority to hire and promote BIPOC individuals in every level of the business? Or are you finding that it's at the entry level? And talk a little bit about that, because I think individuals at some of the HBCUs where we're talking are curious to know.
Yeah, I do think that, our industry has a lot of work to do, for sure. So that's the bad news. The good news is the majority of the companies are on board and want to make a difference, and PAN is one of them. So we immediately took a look at, our organization, and we looked at, how diverse or lack of diversity do we have here, and how inclusive are we? And we looked at our hiring practices, and we looked at our sourcing, practices, and we looked at our client set. We looked at the clients that we are servicing. We looked at the prospects that we're entertaining, bringing on as clients. We looked at our vendors and who are we doing business, who are we doing business with. And so as an organization, and we publish those results. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Hold the Press, but it's a group of individuals that have kind of put themselves out there to try to basically hold a mirror up to, to marketing and PR agencies, saying we got to do a better job here. And PAN immediately stepped up and said, "You're 100% right. We have a PAN diversity and inclusion team. We've had that for about 1.5 years now, and it's at 30 employees in various parts of our organization. And they come together and they help educate us, on Black History Month and Hispanic and heritage, and everything that comes up, so that we can kind of embrace and learn from one another. We have guest speakers that come in on a regular basis. We had a guest speaker in about a month or so ago to come in and teach us about pronouns and the proper use of pronouns and what they mean. And so that group has done a phenomenal job at PAN and continues to bring good education and learning and fun. We had a little cooking class last night, and that was really a lot of fun. And so we have that going on, but we also have a group of leaders in the organization. Darlene's entire team have taken, one of our 6 pillars as we build our DEI journey. And they're focusing on specific areas of our business: the leadership part of it, the communication part of it, the training and development part of it, and the belonging, piece of it, and communication. And so those teams are going to be kicking off within the next 2 weeks, and those teams are going to develop action items to move us further along in our DEI journey. From a hiring perspective, sure, absolutely. Being able to work with, colleges like NCCU and other historical Black colleges, building that network and being able to kind of bring in, really solid internship programs is going to definitely help to get us to, a much better place and have us be more inclusive. But it's also equally important to be hiring at the higher levels too. And PAN did that. PAN has a new VP GM in our New York office. His name is Brendan Thomas. And he's helping us, and it's really important for folks, as we're bringing in folks at the intern level or at the entry levels from some of the schools, that they see somebody, that looks like them, that has that understanding from where they came from, to be able to say, I can get there, I can aspire to that. And he's going to help us make sure that that's part of PAN's culture, and that becomes the fabric of what it is that we do. So I'm proud of the steps that we've taken. We have a lot more to go. But from an industry perspective, Phil absolutely, as you can see, like he's put himself out there. He has spoken to how our commitment to all of our employees. He sits on the board of the Council of PR Firms, and he has a very strong affiliation with that organization and continues to push the DEI efforts. So just make sure too, because obviously if something is probably really important to you guys, ask those questions in an interview. Ask the questions, do the research, see what they have on their website in terms of their DEI efforts and their journey as an organization. It's important. You want to make sure that you're entering an organization that's going to embrace and develop.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a more technical question. I'm sure if I can ask. Can I ask?
By all means.
So the question is as both of you mentioned, some of the soft skills, such as interpersonal skills, are very important. And what are the nonverbal cues that you would take that make you feel a candidate is competent?
Nonverbal.
I guess that may be different on site or via video conference, but I guess there should be some nonverbal cues out there.
Yeah. I think we actually talked a little bit when we were chatting with one of the other colleges the other day about even virtually on Zoom, you can see when someone's engaged. You see, Matthew, you're nodding your head as we're speaking along. That shows engagement. Someone sitting up in their chair. Those are things like even trying to make eye contact, which can be hard because I'm looking at you and then I'm looking at Elizabeth. But you really do try to look at the person, engage with the person. Elizabeth made a joke that she's the hand talker. Clearly I am too. But those are things that you can show excitement in the same way, even virtually. And I feel like those are some of the things, head nods, laughter, a little sense of humor, trying to make the virtual eye contact. I think those are the things that show that someone's kind of into the conversation and engaged in the conversation. Elizabeth, did I miss anything that you look at on Zoom?
Yeah, no, I would agree. When you're doing a Zoom call, you want to make sure that, you've got, a background that isn't really distracting, because you want to be able to kind of have the interviewer be able to kind of focus on you. And the best way that you can show engagement, show your teeth, show your enthusiasm, nod your head. I hear you. Absolutely, those types of the nonverbal cues. It's tough on a Zoom, because you're looking at yourself and no one likes to stare at themselves all day long. So it's a little bit awkward, but at this point, I think we're all kind of used to it. But those are kind of some of the Zoom things, is make sure that your background isn't too distracting. And then, the smiling, nodding, engaging, sitting up, straight.
I would add one other, Tiandu, and that is that my mother used to say at the beginning of a relationship, work on filling those voids of silence. So when you are being interviewed, or whether it be Zoom or eventually in front of someone, learning how to eloquently, effectively fill those voids of silence. And when Elizabeth was talking about preparedness and researching, those are the things that I'm talking about. Jump in with the latest news from that company or that agency. Fill those voids of silence, because it shows that you're eager and really interested.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. On a related note, what makes you feel like you want to help someone or give more advice or respond to messages on LinkedIn?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you that Elizabeth would be better at that than I, because as the head of HR and people, she is in LinkedIn all the time, as are her HR business partners.
I think it's just trying. I think it's again, if someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn and says, oh, congratulations, I just read your post, and you guys seem like you're doing a great job on the mental health side of things and taking care of your employees. I'd love to learn a little bit more. I'm graduating, this May, and I'm looking for an opportunity. That shows me that you've read the latest on PAN. You took the time to kind of comment on it. And that's that to me resonates more than just a flat email that says I'm graduating in May and I'm looking for opportunities.
Thank you.
Yep, I agree.
Thank
Well,
you.
listen, it's already 11:41, and I promised that we would give you back, some time. This has been 1 hour. Sean or Matthew, any final questions that are on your minds? No? Thank you for being here. Well, you're on mute, Matthew.
No, I mean, no question. I think a lot of my questions was answered throughout the whole webinar here. Everything that I
Okay.
want to say, especially about the hiring and everything. I enjoyed everything that y'all said, by the way. It was really, I guess, empowering to know these things, because, you get out here, you don't know what people are looking for. You don't know, exactly what to do, and just hearing it from the professionals themselves, I mean, it really feels great. So thank you so much.
Thank
That's
you.
why we tried to put together this guest lecture series, so that it would bring to a school like NCCU an opportunity to hear directly from people at PAN. Our third session, you're going to hear from an account coordinator, assistant account executive, an account executive, and then someone else a little bit higher up in the organization, to give you the perspective of what do they do? What is their day like? How did they get the job? So Tiandu and Calvin will hopefully promote that, but it's just going to be as valuable, Matthew. So I look forward to seeing you. Let me tell you when that date is. November 3rd. So I'll plan to see you then.
Yes, sir.
Sean, good to see your face. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Any questions or thoughts on your mind?
No, you guys pretty much answered any question that I could think of. And then if the question I was going to ask, Dr. Zhang actually ended up asking it. But thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to kind of inform us and educate us on the things of PR and kind of how the flow is in your office, because that definitely gives me a different perspective. And I know how to kind of gauge my experience and when I do get into my career and start looking for a job.
Yeah, no. And I look forward to meeting you again, Sean, on November 3rd. So I know that you guys were at the first session. So I'm glad. Please continue to communicate with me via LinkedIn. And thank you, Wandu, for putting this together. I really appreciate it.
So I know the event like this will not be completed without Twitter live broadcasting. So I've been doing that while you were talking.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.